I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Peta Stapleton today, all the way from Australia. And Dr. Stapleton is a clinical and health psychologist. She's a researcher and she is a leading expert in the field of emotional freedom technique, which is one of my favorite modalities, and has also just been awarded the Distinguished Contribution to Psychological Science Award in Australia, which is incredibly well deserved. So thank you. I feel like a child on Christmas Eve to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. It's my absolute pleasure to talk about tapping. Can talk about EFT every day, all day.
I am so with you. I am so with you. Well, for the benefit of people watching this or listening to it, I'd love you to just share a little bit about your own background and what brought you into the world of energy psychology and tapping.
Absolutely, because I am a mainstream psychologist, like you said, and have always been in academia as well. Pretty conservative, teaching all the cognitive therapies. But for me, it was about 20 years ago now, where my clinical area was eating disorders. I was running support groups in the local community, teaching at the university, and I was struggling a little bit, I guess, with talk-based therapies in that population group. Like, it was just a little bit hard talking to these young girls with anorexia nervosa and bulimia. And I had a colleague, he back in the dial-up days of internet, if anyone can remember that, and he said, I've come across this weird tapping technique. I want to tell you about it. I think it might help with, he was in the same area, young sufferers of eating disorders. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And I certainly probably wasn't patient enough to sit there with dial-up internet to get a video to load to watch it. He was patient. So he went off and he was, unbeknownst to me, doing some study with Gary Craig, who was, obviously the founder of EFT, that particular tapping method. So anyway, he comes along to a support group I'm running with eating disorder sufferers. We had about 30 women turning up to these weekly groups. And a young girl had a panic attack. Now, he sort of gestured, I'll take her outside to help her calm down, because we were obviously talking about a certain topic. And they came back about 5 minutes later, and this young girl who'd been hyperventilating and obviously triggered by something, 5 minutes later come back. She's calm, composed. They stay for the rest of the group. And I didn't kind of know what had happened. And I wrote about this in one of my books. And I said, oh, I thought he might have popped her a Valium. And I thought, oh, that's a bit concerning. I better have a chat to him about, you can't be giving out Valium. Anyway, the group ends, everyone goes home. And I said to him, oh, please tell me, what happened there with that young girl? She came back so calm, so fast, like within 5 minutes. I said, you didn't give her a Valium, did you? And I was joking. And he said, no, of course not. I did that tapping thing I've been trying to tell you about. And because he'd been trying to tell me for months, but because I'd seen this distinct difference in this young woman, that was what sparked me to kind of say, you need to tell me more about what this thing is, because I just saw something that my brain can't explain. So that was my very first, I guess, entry into EFT or tapping or what it was. We had no science or research, but also probably at the same time, I was the kind of person that used to drive around in my car, again, cassette player. So no Spotify, no CDs, cassette player. And I used to listen to cassettes from Louise Hay. Now Hay House ended up publishing my book. I had no idea that 20 years later that would come full circle. But I used to drive around listening to just any technique I could get my hands on, local library. So I was open, and I think it was that probably allowed EFT to come into my world, which obviously we then took it into the research and academic world. But yeah, that was my personality. My parents are both very open as far as, my dad's done acupuncture for decades. My mum's into plant medicine, herbal medicine, just, in her spare time by interest. So I kind of had the grounding there. And then by the time EFT came along, I just went, yep, no worries. Does it work? Great, let's do it. And then we tested to see, why does this work? And spent the next 20 years researching it.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I do remember dial-up, dial-up internet.
Very slow.
So I suppose for people that are listening and have already kind of thought, I need to understand more about this, in your words, how would you describe what actual emotional freedom technique or tapping, as it's been also referred to, actually is?
Yeah, to me, the most simple way to understand this is it is a stress reduction technique. So it's a technique that you might use like you might do a breathing technique for stress. So EFT is a stress technique. What it does is it uses the combination of a couple of different therapies. One is we're definitely talking about what's happening for us. So there is a cognitive element to it. But the difference to other therapies out there as a stress reduction technique is we are tapping with two fingers, hence the nickname tapping, on known acupuncture points on the body while we do perhaps talk about what's happening for us. So it is a stress reduction technique, but what it's different, I guess, about other talk therapies is we add this somatic body-based element to the talking, which is tapping on these known acupuncture points. And the research has come a long way in that space because we used to talk about that being an energetic system. We now know the acupuncture system in the body is a vascular system. You can absolutely inject tracer dyes into it and see an acupuncture point. It's not energetic, it's actually truly vascular. So that's made our life a lot easier because in 20 years, that's really changed the way that we speak about it.
Interesting. And from the clinical research, what have been some of the really groundbreaking milestones or insights that you've seen from the clinical research that you've done?
Yeah, so most clinical research trials will use self-report measures for people's, differences in psychological symptoms such as anxiety and depression and stress. And that's all great. All research uses those kind of things. I think what's made EFT very different and truly compared to other therapies out there is we've had such a body of biochemistry studies that have been happening over the last decade in particular. They've really shown what happens in the body when you do this tapping technique. For example, there's been 3 DNA studies that have shown tapping on acupuncture points for stress or post-traumatic stress disorder absolutely changes the way a gene expresses itself in your body, which then absolutely correlates with someone's self-report measure of, I don't have that flashback or that nightmare anymore, or that hypervigilance feeling, that anxious feeling. So DNA studies, we've had cortisol testing studies that show cortisol, the stress hormone, absolutely plummets after you tap, which is a good thing as far as inflammation in the body, chronic pain. We have 5 functional MRI studies, and 2 of them I've done here in Australia. So we know what happens in the brain before and after we do tapping, as well as we've most recently done some vagal tone measurements with Dr. Stephen Porges' team, looking at vagal tone activity. So as well as heart rate variability, EEG, blood pressure, like all these biochemistry studies have really emerged in the last decade around EFT, which has told us a lot more about doing this. If I tap on an acupuncture point while I stay focused on my concern or my distress, it's not just that I subjectively feel better or feel a little bit calmer. The whole body is responding to that. And we can see it. We can see it through these studies.
Yeah. And I know myself from, I use tapping most, not necessarily every day, but certainly most weeks. It's like if I feel anything coming, I've been doing it for 13 years. It's like brushing my teeth. I just automatically start tapping on myself and my clients. I've just seen the most phenomenal shifts in my own clients. I've been doing my own non-clinical research for 13 years. And what I know my clients have been astounded with is where, as you've referred to, more traditional approaches to mental health and well-being, they've maybe spent a really long period of time, say in counselling or CBT, And it might have been helpful to a certain degree, but it's certainly not given them the results that they wanted. And then they've come and they've literally within the first couple of sessions, they've just noticed phenomenal shifts. And as you say, if they've experienced trauma, it's like panic attacks. There's a whole range of things. I can't actually see anything that EFT can't be of benefit to. So I know you refer to it as a stress reduction technique, but I'm like, it works with stress, it works with anxiety, it works with depression, it works with guilt, shame, you name it. Is there
Yeah.
anything that EFT can't contribute to?
Yeah. And I guess the common denominator or thread in all these conditions, because sometimes people will say, well, why does it work for so many things? And the thread is some sort of stress response, like it's the autonomic nervous system, whether it's depression and it's underactive, or it's anxiety and it's overactive, or it's chronic pain, or it's, a cancer patient that we're working with to reduce the effects of, chemotherapy with nausea. So there is something about the autonomic nervous system that's common across all these conditions. The only time we sort of say, look, are there any conditions that are contraindicated? And it really boils down to, we think, the practitioner's skill and experience and qualifications. That, if we're supporting people to learn EFT, to use it as a therapeutic tool, that, if they weren't licensed to be using it for certain conditions, then really, that's not appropriate. So that's what it comes down to, really. It's not so much, because there are published trials on schizophrenia, Alzheimer's and dementia, epilepsy. So conditions that you might think, oh no, you probably shouldn't do any tapping there. They're published trials that actually show quite positive outcomes for all of those sort of, more complex presentations. It's just that the person delivering it should be well equipped and supported in doing that. So that's really the caveat that we say.
And what I love about it is how easy it is to learn for ourselves and how simple it is. And I always remember when I first started to learn it, kind of going back 13, probably 14 years ago now, and thinking, wow, how do they know what to say? And just being so blown away by that. But as I realized and learned, is all that we're really tapping on a vast majority of the time, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, is just the thoughts that are going through our head. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's probably the most common question we're asked is, what words do I say when I'm tapping? And the only answer is exactly how you feel. So it could be how you feel, it could be the thoughts that you're aware of, it could be a sensation in the body. That's it. There's no magic words. It's just what you currently feel in that moment. And that might be, like you say, something you're telling yourself. So that could be thoughts. So it's no more complex. And I agree with you. If all the world did self-tapping, that would be amazing. Even just tap and breathe. Like, we really advocate for just tapping as a regulation activity. Just tap and breathe, even with no words. The body responds to that kind of level of sort of stress reduction as well, even if you're not focused on anything. But it really is just that sense of, I've got a tool here that I can use at any point. Like you say, it comes quite naturally to you now, 13 years later, which is, wow, I'm feeling a bit dysregulated. I'm just going to tap. Takes 2 minutes. I'm back inside my body again, and now I can think more clearly. Imagine if the whole world just did that.
Maybe we need to set something up, a world tapping event. See,
Yeah,
I'd love to see the research from that. We'll get Dr. Joe Dispenza on as well.
sure. Yes.
But I'm so passionate about what you're doing, because from the work that I've done with organizations where I've taken EFT into organizations, which was always something that I was going to absolutely do because my background is human resources, it's the corporate world. And it was like, wow, what difference would it make if everybody in an organization knew how to use and utilize EFT tapping? Because from my perspective, I see so many organizations that, we only need to look at the data to see the rates of stress and anxiety and burnout are literally through the roof. And I find it really interesting what you say about the autonomic nervous system. And in an organization, employees are being invited to step out of their comfort zone. They're being invited to do more with less, unfortunately. And so their autonomic nervous system is constantly taking a hit. But to
Mhm.
have EFT in their back pocket to be able to keep regulating it, to me is a no-brainer. And I'd love to know, have you done any work with organizations where you've now got people tapping regularly?
Yeah, we actually just finished only probably 6 weeks ago. For the first time, we've offered a stress reduction 5 week program to school leaders in our state of Queensland. And one of the techniques was tapping. Now, they got a range of techniques. So they got 5 different ones. One was a sleep technique, one was a Dr. Joe Dispenza meditation, because I do research with him as well. And so we offered these school leaders because their stress levels have been going through the roof at a teaching kind of education level, particularly coming out of the pandemic as well. But what we asked them to do, not only to rate obviously their stress levels, but to rate which techniques they enjoyed the most, that they found easiest to use, that kind of thing. Would you believe tapping came out number one? That they found that once they learned how to tap and breathe, the easiest thing to actually apply, rather than, oh, I need to find some time. Meditation's great, but I've got to have time to sit and listen to that one. Sometimes I don't do the sleep techniques, I fall asleep. Gratitude exercise they learnt as well. Again, needed to find time. They found tapping really easy because they could do it on the run, they could do it in the car, they could do it before the students walked in the classroom. So we're rolling that out at a national level, at an organisational level, but from the school leader point of view to filter down to the students. We've run lots of student trials over the years, but really to help the leaders out there. So we've been doing that kind of work in organisations at an education level. And that's probably because my whole family are teachers. So, I come from that kind of world. But my colleague, Dr. Dawson Church, who in America, he's done quite a few corporate EFT trials where they've obviously taught the techniques, but then monitored people in a corporate setting and a business sense, and taught them how to use it for a range of different things, but then measured sort of their outputs against kind of work efficiency and things like that. So he was able not only to teach them for stress, and these were business owners, but also things like pain in the body, but addictive behaviors. So certainly emotional eating or drinking too much, that was targeted as well. So some of those coping behaviors that normally people might use to cope with their stress, and then found that not only did all of those things respond, but they were to see outcomes in their kind of business productivity as well. So yeah, there's lots of pockets of, like you say, that corporate kind of setting or education settings where the staff are learning EFT and using it, as just part of one of their wellness kit kind of strategies.
Yeah. And I love what you say about being able to do EFT on the run. And I was actually having this conversation with a private client of mine last night who is a psychiatrist, and he was saying actually what he loved is that he could just do it whilst waiting for the kettle to boil. And it kind of reminds me of that, the James Clear research, autonomic habits, of actually, for me, I do it first thing on a morning when I'm journaling because I've created that habit, but waiting for the kettle or in the car, well, not in the car if you're driving, that might get you into trouble. Um, but it's that ability to just do it so quickly. And as much as I absolutely love, love, love Dr. Joe Dispenza, I love his meditations, they're quite long. And
Yes.
they are, you're kind of sort of locked in for maybe a good hour or so. But that ability to just do literally, as you say, like a couple of minutes EFT tapping on yourself, and it's like you've calmed everything down, you're back in the room. And for a business leader or an educational leader or an employee, that ability to do that consistently, to me would just create such a ripple effect within an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're calmer, you affect the next person you interact with, and all of that kind of ripples out. And, Gary Craig, as the founder of EFT, had that as a personal mission, I guess, that personal peace procedure that he talked about. If we only just focus on our own reactions, we will have that ripple effect on everyone else that we interact with, and how far that goes, we don't know. But all you have to do is only be responsible for your own kind of emotional response in a situation, and then everyone else benefits. So, yeah, Tiny Habits, I think BJ Fogg's book, Tiny Habits, very similar. Just a tiny habit, it might be just one tap, but it starts a process. And it is that daily kind of building of a habit that makes it easier to remember. We advocate for tapping while you do something else automatic every morning. I always say brushing your teeth, because it's something you do every day. And if you just tapped a couple of taps at the same time, you build that habit. And then it's easier to remember when something a bit bigger happens where you might need tapping to help you regulate. You've already built the habit, rather than trying to remember, what do I do in this moment? Because it's that tiny habit that you've actually built.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I work a lot with women in leadership. In fact, it's kind of my niche to work with women in leadership positions to help them really turn around a lot of identity around not feeling good enough, imposter syndrome, and EFT just supports it beautifully. But what I love is that in the world of leadership, there is so much leadership training out there that only focuses on the behavior and just teaching managers on a more cognitive level, what you need to do to change behavior. And as you and I know, can't, wouldn't it be great if I could just say, oh, this is all you need to do to change your behavior? But where I see a beautiful opportunity to really create a paradigm shift in how we support leaders is bringing in the energy psychology, because from an emotional intelligence perspective, to me, if a leader can't regulate their emotions and can't regulate their autonomic nervous system, they're not going to be great leaders. But I'd love to know your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's such a beautiful tool to make us become more aware and build our own insight. Because the more you tap, and particularly if you tap quietly and you listen, you become aware of things that pop to mind. We know that as the amygdala, the stress center, becomes calmer through tapping, the hippocampus, your memory center, one memory center, actually can give people information. And so people become aware of those patterns or where a behavior may have come from. And then, of course, they can use tapping to help work through that or process it. So, tapping to me develops insight, which goes hand in hand with emotional intelligence. And then, of course, in those leadership positions, to be able to, even if you were triggered by some interaction, to be able to go away and process that, either with someone or on your own with EFT, and then come back into that, you demonstrate, those kind of behaviors. And then, of course, a lot of people will ask in those corporate business settings, how are you coping with what's going on? Or how are you coping? It's this perfect opportunity to kind of say, well, I do this tapping thing, because people see the outcome. It's how I now have a 17 and a 21-year-old, both daughters, and they've had tapping their whole lives. But the question they used to ask is, how come mum stays calm all the time? And they would see me tapping. So it's much easier to offer it to someone else if they see the outcome or they notice you doing this technique, because then they realize that you seem to cope better than maybe other people. So yeah, I think it dovetails in all of those kind of aspects that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And I know from having delivered EFT as part of employee wellbeing webinars that employees love it. They're like, I want to know more about this tapping thing, because we just have so much fun. We get, people to do an actual live demo, and it just never, even though I've been doing it for years, it never fails to amaze me that even in a sort of 5-10 minute demo, I can have somebody that's experiencing, I don't know, acute pain. I heard something the other day, somebody referred to it as tech neck. That was a new one to me because they're just all hunched over. So
Yes.
they might be experiencing a pain in their shoulders, or something's happened at work, or even just something in their personal life that, they, of course, things that are happening in our personal life, we can't just always shut the door to that to be at work. But what they're able to experience, and for me, it's that, as you say, it's the experience, because words don't always teach, but when they experience it and they're like, they almost kind of look at me like I'm a witch. It's not an unusual experience, but they're just like, wow, like, how does this work? They're sort of in disbelief that something so inherently simple can be so profound.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're still surprised, not surprised because we know how it works, but even in a clinical trial, when we see the outcomes, or, my imaging, person runs down the hall and says, it worked, the chronic pain trial changed their brains or something. And we're like, oh, wow. Like, we're actually still a little bit surprised, going, that's really cool. But I think that's what's refreshing about it is, we genuinely have all this research now, hundreds and hundreds of publications, but we still have those moments too where someone will email me and say, oh, I forgot I was in your, trial because I don't have chronic pain anymore. And I'm like, what do you mean? Where did it go? Like, but they did the tapping. So yeah, we're a bit the same.
And it's wonderful to see it becoming so more mainstream in the sporting world. Quite often I will see clips of people sat, say, on a basketball court, and they're tapping on themselves. And there's sort of a part of me that thinks, gosh, how can you zone into yourself when you're on a basketball court about to go live? But as you say, we don't always have to be in this perfect, really calm environment, do we?
No, and I think that's where something like tap and breathe, and yeah, there's lots of footage now, of Olympic runners standing there tapping just before they, take off, or racing car drivers, or there's lots of them out there. So people are learning it. And they're obviously just using it to regulate themselves, even though there could be excitement that they're about to kind of, take off in that run in the Olympics or play that basketball game. And tapping can even just help you come back and sort of be back in that window so you can stay totally turned on with the brain and focused, which is what they need. That excitement or those nerves or that anxiousness might just sort of get in the road. So tapping just to regulate, I think, is underestimated, that you can quickly, do 30 seconds of tapping without saying anything and still get the benefit.
Amazing, amazing. Now, can you help me squash a belief around stress? Because one of the things that our organisation does is it delivers a lot of mental health for managers training. And I always find this a really interesting topic about stress, because I still see a lot of people with this idea that stress can be a good thing. Stress can, if I need to deliver on something, stress helps me to do that, or, used in the right way, stress can support me. And I think some of it is a misunderstanding of what do we mean by this term stress. But in
Mhm.
terms of stress and performance, and even high performance, can you help me squash the belief that stress does not support you in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I think I know where they're going. And we talk about eustress, EU stress versus distress. And you're right, that performance, Yerkes Dodson's famous curve of you need a certain amount of stress to get optimal performance. But at the minute you go over that, performance drops off, functioning drops off as well. And to be honest, I'm not sure everyone knows where their sweet spot is as far as that goes. And so I think people kind of have these beliefs. It happens for us with our students where they're like, that one time I wrote my assignment the night before, even though I had 10 weeks, but I got a really good grade. They get this classical conditioning then of, I did it at the last minute. I was under heaps of stress, but I stayed up all night, pulled an all-nighter, and then I got a really good grade. I better do that again next time because clearly the stress helps me. What people are forgetting, all stress, whether it's you stress because you're about to, go on stage and sing a song or, run the Olympic mile or whatever, all stress is a stress on the body system. Cortisol is released. It is sending, certain messages to the muscles and digestion system in the body. All stress is physiological. And so to let that go on for an extended period of time can create too much inflammation, which then leads to chronic pain, which then leads to other kind of autoimmune illnesses and diseases. So people might think, it's just stress. And if anything, like I say to my students as well, it's not just stress, it is profoundly impacting the cellular activity in your body, and you can be damaging that. And I don't want to feel like that. Stress is only ever supposed to be temporary. You're supposed to come back to equilibrium. So to have these long extended periods of stress because you think that helps you work better is fiction, because we just have to look at you under a microscope or test your cortisol levels and we'll be able to tell you, or link how when you get out of the chair you have those aches and pains, that could be due to stress, that could be due to inflammation in the body. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just working out what's driving that for people and the secondary gain that they might be getting from having stress, whereas all I'm trying to do is just be calm all the time. So even though I might have lots to do, or people might think I accomplish a lot in my daily work, I'm trying to stay calm all the time because I'm trying to keep my body system in a calm state and not spiked with cortisol at all.
Absolutely. And I think it was Joe Dispenza that I read that 99% of physical health conditions start in the stress response. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't know about he talks about 4 types of stress, so very much internal, environmental, and that can be sound. So there's lots of research coming out about children who grow up in really noisy cities with sirens. And even though that's their normal, it actually sets their threshold a lot higher, and they have higher cortisol levels. So the body reacts to sound, environmental stressors like that, where again it's their normal but it's not normal for the body to be in that state. So he talks about, as well as obviously things we consume that can be toxins. So I mean, I would say it's got to be somewhere high, that the level of chronic health issues and long-term health issues that we see have got stress at their core. Everything from autoimmune illnesses to non-DNA driven kind of diseases. There's not a deformity in the DNA that you're born with, yet people are ending up with these kind of, serious health issues. And his research obviously shows that meditation is his strategy, that the body will respond, and you can downregulate DNA expression and then not have an illness anymore because you don't have a gene that's expressing itself around that illness. He has lots of that pop up in his research as well. So yeah, it's the same thing. I had a PhD student look at recovery from chronic illness with EFT, and interviewed all of these participants that had quite serious, but EFT had helped the body come back into that equilibrium, which meant they didn't have the illness symptoms anymore. So it goes both ways, just different tools to get you there.
And I totally agree with you. And I think um the for me it's that empowering people, especially, whether they've been through trauma, whether they've been through an illness, whether they've just been through a really difficult time in their life, that they can empower themselves by learning this. And I make it a point, whether I'm training an organization and its employees or my private clients, it's kind of giving them it. It's not saying, the magic doesn't just happen in the sessions or in the training. I want to give you the tools so that you can use this at any given time, because I know people, their minds are so busy. So I think they sometimes struggle with the meditation to even just settle And I can be a bit like this as well. It's sort of settling down, whereas EFT, for me, it just cuts through all of that because my mind can be quite busy, but a few minutes of tapping and it's like, oh, there we go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think they can all be used in conjunction. That I've got clients really want to learn to meditate, but they just use tapping to get into that quiet space to then turn on their meditation. So they're really kind of complementary with each other and can be used to get whatever outcome you want. You know, everyone has different outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So yeah,
Oh,
they work great.
no, absolutely. And I would love to do a Dr. Joe Dispenza week-long retreat and just spend a week in his meditations. I think that would be
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm wondering, from thinking about how we support people with our healthcare systems, what changes are you seeing it at all in as far as getting EFT into, um, we have the National Health Service in the UK. What's the equivalent in Australia? I can't quite remember actually.
Yeah, so we have state by state health departments. I can absolutely tell you the majority of them have embraced tapping, whether that's many of them are suggesting tapping as staff wellness activities or strategies. So when someone comes in to a hospital setting to work, they're shown videos of EFT. Funnily enough, they're videos of me, even though I didn't give them the videos, but they're showing them saying, we recommend this for your own self-care as a healthcare worker. So that's amazing to see. We've also got around the country lots of different private hospitals who include, so there might be a private hospital for chronic pain, EFT is delivered there. So they use EFT. There's an addictions hospital. EFT is part of the suite of therapies that's offered. So there's a lot of schools. It's growing legs, if you like, that, I certainly know around the world it's mimicked. I do know that your National Health Service has just asked an EFT practitioner to train about 20 practitioners that work for the NHS in EFT. So that has only happened this week, I'm aware of. So the VA in America has embraced EFT, the Veterans Affairs, Canada has embraced. So it seems to be that there's lots of little pockets where if there's a practitioner or someone that perhaps is aware of the research, they're using it and they're all perfectly happy using it. And it's sort of, making a life of its own. If anything, I think it's the groundswell acceptance of EFT that has created that change. We just came in with the research to sort of show how it worked. But yeah, it's certainly being picked up more and more. Someone will send me an email and say, hey, did you know we use it in our prison over here in Western Australia? And I'm like, I didn't know that. Okay. So like being used in prisons, it's being used in quite a few prisons in America now. So yeah, it's popping up everywhere. And I think that's the practitioners that are making that happen.
Yes. Well, many years ago, in my mission to take EFT into the world, if you like, I managed to get an appointment with the Deputy Minister for Mental Health. And I didn't have the clinical research. And I said, look, if we brought this into the NHS, like it would be groundbreaking. We could save money on this. We could, I kind of went in so pumped up and said, look, I've got a team of people that are willing to give their time for free, but we need to run it as a clinical study with a university. All I need you to do is open up a few doors. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for your firstborn child. Just help me to open some doors. And honestly, it was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. And so it's wonderful to hear that probably about 8 years later, we're training 20 people. So anybody listening to this that wants to take it into the NHS, please reach out to us.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And change sometimes can take a while to shift, existing beliefs and certain ways of doing. There is some suggestion 17 or 20 years for research to have an impact in the clinical sort of community and be accepted. And look, EFT has been studied for about 20 years now in research. So we are at that that kind of threshold. That was the case for EMDR, the eye movement therapy. It took about that time as well. So we're there, we're right there. It's probably a great time to be involved in EFT, because we're literally, people that have just learned it are going to go, oh yes, that thing's evidence-based. You know, we're almost there. Compared to 20 years ago when you and I both sort of started, where we're like, wonder how this thing works. So we've come a long way.
And I guess that's the thing. It's wonderful to have been part of that journey for so many years, because even if we haven't been part of the clinical research, I mean, I've lost count of how many people I've worked with one-to-one, and I pretty much bring EFT into every single session, and it's just so, so potent. But one thing before we wrap up, which I know in the world of personal development is a huge, huge topic. It's the topic of manifestation. And I know from reading so many books like Dr. Joe Dispenza's Becoming Supernatural, or Breaking the Habit of Being You, or Carol Luck's book, Tapping into Wealth, Jack Canfield, all these amazing, amazing thought leaders are just wonderful at helping us to see how EFT can help with manifestation. And I know myself, it works. But I would love you to give us a little bit of the secret sauce on how EFT works for manifestation purposes.
Yeah, sure. So it's probably a little bit different to how a lot of those thought leaders do approach it, which, you know, they might, Jack, I know, talks about, you know, vision boards and visualization. We know there's loads of research that support, if the brain believes that it can happen and you can visualize yourself, you know, having a goal come true, then, you know, absolutely things will start to shift in your world. They are all great. I use all of those techniques myself anyway. But the way tapping particularly works is when someone wants to set a goal and they might write that out, we ask them, so why don't you think the goal has actually come true yet? So what are the reasons? They could be excuses, they could be reasons, they could be legitimate, but often they're the little voice inside the head. And Jack, I know, writes about, and even Margaret Lynch Rayner writes about it as well, where it's that little tail ender, that little voice in the head that goes, we don't think that you deserve this goal to come true, or that can't possibly happen because blah, blah, blah. So in tapping, we tap on those little voices or the excuse. So we're always trying to decrease sort of the level of, you know, intensity. So if that was rated a 10 out of 10, as in that little voice in my head says there's no way you can possibly have this goal come true, we would tap so that that didn't feel true anymore, which then allows that goal to kind of be open to actually manifest, if you like. So in tapping, we're always kind of coming in from that angle where, you know, set the biggest goal you want. Now tell me why you think you can't. Why hasn't it come true already? And you get all those excuses and those reasons, and we just systematically work through them. And I know before we jumped on, I said, I'm happy to tell you a story about where this came true for a young person, if you like. We had been invited into a school. So we'd already done some school trials on EFT in this school, but they had this particular group of year 11 students, so they're 1 year before they finish. And they said, could you come in and run some workshops? And we went in for about 3 weeks in a row just to teach them how to use EFT for goal setting and goals. They just felt that these students would really benefit. It was a hard year, I think, and this was pre-pandemic, but they said, we know it worked really well for these other students for stress, but could you just make it that angle of goal setting? And we're like, of course we can. Wouldn't that be a fabulous skill to learn as a teenager? Kind of, you know, try to see if some of your goals. So we go into this class, we were working with them for a few weeks, and we said, write down a goal you really want to come true in the next 12 months, because at least then you'll have some time frame. So one of the students had written down that he really wanted to become the school captain in year 12 the following year. And that entailed giving a speech and everyone had to vote for you and whatever. And we're like, okay, so why do you think you're not going to become the school captain? So he'd written all these reasons down. And a lot of them were about that he was new to the school and that he really felt He hadn't gone through all the year levels. He'd only come that year from a different school. No one really knew him. So therefore, he didn't think anyone would vote for him. And even though he might give a good speech, they would just go, "We don't know who you are." So he wrote all these reasons down. So we helped him tap through them. We also helped another student who'd had a shoulder injury playing football. He really wanted to, the goal was get back to playing football, but he's really worried about being re-injured because all the other teams knew about his shoulder surgery and he felt like they would target him. So he's two young men, they're like 16 years old. So we just helped them tap through, and we were coming to the end of our time with these students. So we got them all down quite low in our ratings, 0 to 10, as far as no, they felt the goal kind of, there was possibility. So anyway, we finished up and that was the end. We didn't go back. Now, the next year, I was at the school for a different reason and I ran into the school principal and I wasn't even thinking about it. And I said, "While I'm here, who's your school captain this year?" And he said the student's name who'd done all that tapping. And I just started laughing and he's like, "Why are you laughing?" And I'm like, "Don't worry about it." And I just let it go. I know the other student went back to play football and didn't get injured again as well. So they're just two little examples, but I didn't speak to the student. I just got the information that he'd become the school captain. So obviously, clearing out some of those doubts, and that's really what it's about. It's your level of doubt that it wasn't there as a bit of a roadblock anymore. And that's how we use EFT for manifestation. It's like, what's your biggest dream? What do you? Okay, now what's the doubt about? Let's tap to decrease that doubt. So I use it myself all the time as well. Taught my children. And often the first way I'll teach a teenager in therapy is to actually use tapping for that style of thing, because it's much more exciting and interesting because they have like a buy-in. They're like, "Well, I want this car that I want to buy." And it's like, "Okay, I want to pass my test," or whatever. You're like, "Okay, let's do some tapping on the doubt." So it's a wonderful way to actually, really create the life that you want to.
Absolutely. And I know as an entrepreneur and having worked with other uh, entrepreneurs, just in terms of what we believe that we can achieve in the world, the impact level that we can have, our financial goals, what our ability is to do anything. And I think it's a lot more kind of sexier, as you say. Well, you didn't say, they're my words. But it's that sort of like, oh, if you're looking to manifest more money or a relationship or something, I think we can get a lot of buy-in, as opposed to you should do this every day because it's really going to help your stress level.
I completely agree. Yes.
So you can all think about what it is that you want to manifest if Santa doesn't bring it to you this year. Oh, thank you so much. This has been an absolute joy. I feel like I could talk to you for just hours and hours until the cows come home about EFT tapping, but I will leave it there. If people want to read about your clinical research, where's the best place to find that, Dr. Stapleton?
Yeah, so my research page at Bond University, so you could literally just Google my name and Bond University, and research page will come up, so that all our trials we've ever published on EFT are freely available to read. Of course, petastapleton.com, if anyone wants to connect or reach out for anything in particular, you can absolutely just connect through the website.
Wonderful. Well, we hope that you've all been inspired, whether you're an organisation, a business leader, a political leader, or a 12-year-old that wants to be a school captain, to start tapping every single day. So thank you once again for your time, and we look forward to everybody joining us in the future. Dr. Joe Dispenza, if you're watching this, I will nail you. I've nailed so many people. You are still on my list.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Sarah. It's my pleasure.
Everybody, bye bye for now.